Taste ultimate success with these tender, fluffy scones made with almond flour. They're easy enough for a novice, but yield bakery-style results with a buttery taste and light, tender texture. Hi, I'm Melissa Erdelak from the gluten-free website Mama Gourmand, and today we are going to make almond flour scones. I love working with almond flour when it's done right. When it's not done right, it can be really dense and heavy because it's just ground nuts, so it has a lot of oil in it. It could get really compressed. But through my experience, I found that you can add an easy kitchen ingredient to combat that so you get really light, fluffy, tender scones. So let's make your gluten-free life a success and not a hot mess. So let's start off with our dry ingredients. First, the almond flour. I'm using a blanched almond flour, which I recommend for baking. And the important thing you have to know about almond flour is the recipe all depends on how the person that created the recipe measured the almond flour, because how it's measured can have drastic results on how much actually makes it into the bowl. So I always include the weight too if you want to be super accurate about it, but I'll just show you how I volume measure it if you would like to use this shortcut. So I just put my cup in and kind of fluff it up and then scoop it out and use a knife to kind of tap it level and then sweep the rest into the bag. To this, we are going to add 1/3 cup of sugar. Now the sugar, you can use a reduced amount. You could use a sugar-free substitute, but I recommend in a granulated form, not a liquid one. Or full disclosure, I have accidentally left out the sugar before and that works too. Here's the secret ingredient, cornstarch. This absorbs that extra oil in the almond flour to make a fluffier result. If you don't want to use cornstarch or need another alternative, I've tested it with tapioca starch as well, and that works. Get out of there, cornstarch. And then a tablespoon of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Whisk that all to combine. I'm just going to use my pastry blender to whisk that up because we're going to use that next when we cut in the butter. For the butter, I have 4 tablespoons of cold chopped butter. If you need a dairy-free recipe, you can substitute a plant-based butter here too. And then I'm just going to work that in with the pastry blender. If you don't have one of these things, you could also use a fork, or you could kind of just use your fingers and work it all in. You'll know it's done because the butter is mostly worked in and you won't have any really large chunks left. It'll be kind of sandy and pebbly looking. So at this point, I'm going to add the mix-ins to it. I'm adding a cup of blueberries, but you could do chocolate chips or nuts or raspberries. And I work this into the dry ingredients before adding the liquid, just so you don't, especially with berries, you don't want to smash them. And these berries that I'm using are alarmingly large, so I definitely don't want to smash those. And now we're going to whisk together our liquid ingredients and add that to it. For the liquid ingredients, we use 1 egg, and this just helps with binding everything together because almond flour doesn't have any gluten in it. A teaspoon of vanilla for flavor, and then 1/4 cup of sour cream or yogurt. Today I'm using yogurt, but you can use either interchangeably. And typically scones use all butter, but I found with gluten-free recipes, using a combination of sour cream and butter for the fat makes a better result because then they aren't as greasy, because the gluten-free starches have a harder time absorbing all that fat. So this is where the sour cream comes in. Just combine that together and then just pour the liquid into the dry and combine that together. And you want to stir this up until you don't see any dry ingredients anymore. So it should be all one soft-ish dough. To shape the scones, right now the dough is too soft to work with, so I put a piece of plastic wrap over this and pop it in the fridge for a half hour before we take the dough out and shape it. This helps in two ways. First of all, it's easier to shape when the dough is cold. The other thing is scones, really, you need that butter to re-solidify and get cold, because when they bake from being cold, or even better yet, I've froze them unbaked and then baked from frozen, it leads to flakier, more tender results. So make sure the dough is nice and cold before you shape it and put it into the oven. So our dough's nice and chilled, and I just have a baking sheet with a piece of parchment on it, and then I sprayed the parchment with nonstick cooking spray. So I am just gonna shape this dough into a thick disc so it doesn't stick. I'm just gonna kind of use the cooking spray that's already on here. And you want your disc to be about 6 to 7 inches in diameter and about 1 inch to 1.5 inches thick. Once it's shaped, then just take a sharp knife and cut it into 6 wedges. So we're just gonna cut it in half, and then cut each half into thirds. Okay, and then we're just going to pull the wedges apart to about 2 inches apart from each other. The reason I do that is because when they bake up closer together, the steam traps in between it, and that's what gives it that tender texture. So you need that steam to kind of incorporate into the scones as it bakes. So don't spread them apart too far, just about 2 inches away from each other. Now at this point you could just pop them in the oven, but I like to do a little bakery trick here, and I'm going to brush on some heavy cream and then sprinkle coarse sugar on top, so it gives it like a nice crystally, sugary crunch. We're gonna bake these in a 425 oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. Almond flour recipes generally take longer to bake just because there's more oil and fat in there. And they also are a little harder to tell when they're done because the toothpick test doesn't necessarily work. You will put the toothpick in and it'll come out dry, but it still may not be enough time for the moisture to evaporate. When I'm baking almond flour recipes, I always have a tendency to slightly overbake. It's not as much of a risk as it drying out just because there's so much oil in it. If you would like to make these ahead of time, you have 2 options. So one thing I've done is, as I mentioned before, I cut out the dough into the wedges and then froze them like that. And then when you go to bake them, you bake them directly from frozen. So this would be a great option if you have like a brunch or company and you can pre-make everything, put it in the freezer, and then just pop it out and have fresh baked scones. The other thing you can do is bake them, cool them completely, wrap them each up in plastic wrap and pop them in the freezer that way. And then when you're ready to grab one, just thaw it out and rewarm it slightly. You can definitely serve them just like they are, but sometimes I'll make a quick glaze for them. I'll just mix together some powdered sugar with a little bit of milk until it's a drizzling consistency and then drizzle them over the top. You could either do a lemon glaze or just milk too, which is really good. For the full recipe, you can check the description box below, and I will see you in the next video.